Hello everyone, Kier here, and welcome to the InfiNOT podcast. I'm focused on the casual nature of the game, and each week I discuss the new patch, the new card, and my feelings on the game. Let's hop into it. So this week we have a pretty interesting OTA and a new release with the card Moonstone, which I'm pretty excited to talk about. But, you know, let's just get into it. Moonstone is a 4/6 that says, ongoing has the ongoing effects of your 1, 2, and 3 cost cards here. When this card was being previewed, I had assumed that the best use for Moonstone would be for Mystique, right? Because you have the ability to copy something big after you play it on turn 5 into that Moonstone lane, and then maybe pair that with a second 3-drop or something. And I have to say, I think I was correct. The best Moonstone decks that I have seen are utilizing Mystique to really double down on an effect. It's not always the case. I think Moonstone is also just like a nice backup for certain ongoing cards. You know, like if you want a decent body to help with your Victoria hand, she works amazing there, right? A 4/6 plus a 2/3 and you get double the effect is just good. I also think that there are a couple of cards that are really good with Moonstone, and I would recommend, if you're playing Moonstone, the list that I've concocted has been changing as I've been playing it, but something that's remained extremely good is playing Ravonna. Ravonna and Moonstone just make a fantastic combo. It's a lot of discount, and if you have something like Jubilee, Iron Man, and Mystique in your deck, you're going to get a lot of use out of that doubling of the effect. And the same could be said about, you know, some of the other 3-cost cards. I think Mystique is definitely a standout, but we'll be talking about it later, but Mr. Fantastic just got buffed, and that is an amazing target for Moonstone. Captain America is also a surprisingly good target. Speed is an amazing target, and one that I personally like. Speed, as you probably all know already, is one of my favorite cards in the game. Moonstone isn't a perfect card by any means, and I think part of that is some of the stronger ongoing cards just don't get like a bonus because of Moonstone's effect. Like, the effects that you want to work with her are ones that are going to boost power. Like, having a second Luke Cage isn't going to help you, really. And in the event that, like, you know, an Enchantress just comes down and wrecks you, that also sucks. I think Moonstone is only going to get better as time goes on, and people are, you know, not teching specifically for her. Like, the deck that I was playing felt really good, but at my rank, people are just playing Super Scroll and Enchantress, which really... I actually like Super Scroll's design, but in weeks like this, I'm like, man, that is really annoying. But hey, what can you do, right? So I do think that this card is pretty good. I think that for Patriot decks, for Victoria hand decks, for Spectrum decks, I mean, she fits into a lot more stuff than you'd think. Even just like, I haven't seen anybody doing this, but if you were to put this on top of a Morbius, there's just no way you're losing that lane, right? So I think she does have a place. She is susceptible to a lot of, you know, the same problems as any other sort of card with a big effect like this, which is, you know, if you're relying on her effect for something, it could probably hurt you if the opponent teched for it. But hey, I mean, that's what the card game is about. So yeah, really good release for me. I'm loving this card so far. I think it's really cool. And if you don't know, Moonstone in the comics is like easily one of the most evil villains in Marvel. She's so evil, I don't even like her. Like, she is just genuinely like the spawn of Satan. I mean, just so evil. So I'm not a huge fan of the character necessarily, but I think this card is amazing. I'm really excited to play more with it. So yeah, I'd say it's a good 10 out of 10 release for me. Moving on to the meat and potatoes of this week, it is the OTA balance update. This is the first one that we've gotten in a while, and I'll just preface this by saying I'm like 50-50 on this one. I don't know. A lot of these changes don't feel right to me, but we'll get into it. Let's start with Scream. Scream went from a 2/3 to a 2/2 And there's now a bug fix that says Scream will no longer gain power if it can't be taken, such as due to Luke Cage. And this is relevant. You may or may not have heard other people talking about this analogy, but the word steal is relevant to what the card does. And if you try to take $1 from somebody and you don't get the $1, you don't have $1 then. And that's sort of the terrible explanation from me to say that the reason that they're changing this bug, as it were, is because they don't feel like if Luke Cage is on the board, Scream or RG, Rocket and Groot, should get power from it. Like, technically, you could try to argue that they should get the power while the card doesn't lose anything, but the devs are saying it's stealing. Like, you're not duplicating or anything. You're not copying power. It's stealing. So if you can't steal it because something's preventing you from stealing it, you shouldn't get the power. I don't know. I see their logic, but also I think it's okay to have cards do cool things. I don't know. I that's just my take on it anyway. They also kind of talk about how they have a sort of tangential buff to help with the Scream archetype, since she's losing a point of power and a relevant effect, and that is Spider-Man. Spider-Man is going from a 3/5 to a 2/4 that says on reveal, move to another location and pull an enemy card from here to there. And this is good, right? It's losing 1 point of power, but it's going down an entire energy cost. On the other hand, though, I don't know if this is gonna help all that much. I mean, sure, you know, a 2/4 stat line's good. You're moving an enemy card, so it's gonna get that extra power from Scream, but I don't know if Scream needed another card for that. I mean, there are lots in the game that do it, like, you know, Cannonball, Polaris, Juggernaut, the list goes on, right? And with those cards, you have a little bit of a better idea of what's happening, where Spider-Man is completely random at a 2/4. So, I don't know. I'm not fully sold on this. I do think that this is just a better stat line. So, I think for Spider-Man enjoyers, there might be, you know, an argument to use this in certain decks. But, I'm not exactly sold. Luke Cage is going from a 3/3 to a 3/2. And really the only place I see this being relevant is in Cerebro, because now Cerebro 2 has Luke Cage, while Cerebro 3 no longer does. But in terms of its, like, impact, you know, it's a point of power. Now, 3/2 does not sound like a good stat line, but you're not doing it for the stat line, right? You're doing it for the effect. If you're putting it in your deck, you're using it for a very specific purpose, so I think that this is okay. Now, I'm not exactly happy with this next change. US Agent is going from a 2/3 that says ongoing 4, 5, and 6 cost cards have -3 power here to, -4 power to -3 power. In other words, now big cards are slightly bigger against US Agent, and I don't like it. I can understand, like, if you're looking at the numbers, right, and somebody has a full lane with a bunch of big cards, you're adding, with the old US Agent, 16 power, which is a big stat line. Don't get me wrong, that is absurd for a 2 cost. But it also has a really heavy deck building restriction on you, right? You have to include Luke Cage, or you have to position your cards in another lane, or you need to have all small cards, right? And the chance of another deck having that many 4, 5, and 6 cost cards in a lane is already kind of small. So it was always like a cool upside of this card. I'm not saying that the card is dead, or that it didn't deserve, you know, maybe a numbers change, but, like, man, this feels just really rough. This is what the card started as, and, like, I was still a big believer in this card, by the way. I got this card with the Spotlight, and I was really excited to play it. At the time, a lot of people were poo-pooing it. I still think that this card has a place, but it's way less impactful in that lane, right? Before, if you had, like, a Hulk in a lane, it would go down to 8 power, and now it's going to 9 power, which is like, that's still respectable for a 6 cost. Like a 6/9 is the bare minimum I'd say a 6 cost has to be in order to be playable. So like, I it's not that this card is suddenly going to go to trash tier. I just think that this is really odd choice for a card that I felt really opened up certain deck ideas. And they mention here that basically the reason that they're targeting US Agent is because they think that this nerf to Luke is going to make there be less Luke cages. And I don't know, man. That sounds weird to me. Maybe, once the meta pans out and I see how this card works, it's still going to have a place and it's still going to be good. It's just, I don't know. Cumulatively, that loses a lot of weight. Khazar has a very simple change. He's going from a 4/4 to a 4/5. And he gives your 1-cost cards +1 power, as you probably already know. This is good, although I don't, like, how do I say this? It just feels like a change is being made for the sake of a change. Is this going to make Khazar better in the decks that he's played in? Yes, he's bigger. But that doesn't, that won't entice more people to put him into their deck. Like, if you're already playing a Zoo deck, you probably already have Khazar. If you're already playing Ultron, you probably also already have Khazar. So this feels weird to me. I think it's more of those things that's like, why not? Why not buff him? So I'm not mad about this by any means. I hope I don't mean to misconstrue that. I just mean, like, I don't know. I don't think that this is going to change much. Let me put it that way. Next up is a card near and dear to my heart. It is Hydra Bob. And it's funny, too. They refer to Hydra Bob as Hydration Robert, as the community likes to call him, in these notes. But he's going from a 1/5 to a 1/4. And look, I believed in this card at a 1/4. This truly is not going to stop me from playing this card in almost every one of my decks. I think that it's a fun effect. It's a cool stat line. I think I'm still going to use it, and it's going to be great. I do think that this is going to make this card worse, and I also think that they're correct in identifying that it's become like a staple. I don't think that this is a good look, especially because, if you remember, they had originally set this card as 1/4, and then, like, I think it was 2 hours before the card left the spotlights, they were like, hey guys, we're buffing this to 1/5, by the way, because people were saying that it's trash. And I think now that people have, come around to this card, it's gonna be a lot better than people remember it being at 1/4. But I just want to put it on the record by saying I think that this card was already good at 1/4. I said it when the card first came out. I felt like I was going crazy. It's like Hawkeye with no effort. And the snap condition, like, how many times is your opponent going to snap Bob out of a location? And how many times is that going to matter? Like, as we've seen, it doesn't all that much. Typically you can play around it or you can do other things. So yeah, I'm still all in for this card. I'm a huge Hydra Bob fan. But, like, I could understand why it would look bad on their part, especially given how this card, maybe people are saving up for it, or, maybe they are seeing it now. I know a couple of content creators have spoken about how, like, this card is essentially all upside, and I tend to agree, but I'm a bit of a hipster anyway, so I probably would have liked this card if it wasn't good. Just my 2 cents. I think that this change makes sense. It's just, I feel like this is going to be a hot button thing for a lot of people. Sentry is going from a 4/9, a 4/8 that gives a -8 to the right side location to a -9 to the right side location and a 4/9. I totally butchered that, but you get the point. It's going up and it's going down 1. So I think that this is fine. As a 4/10, I if I remember correctly, I actually wasn't a huge fan of the Sentry change, because I liked the 4/10 stat line. It felt pretty chonky, and you had to play a specific deck in order to get value out of it. I do think that this is going to make him better. I just don't know if the Annihilus decks are going to, get played. I do think it's awfully convenient that there's like a $50 bundle right now with an Annihilus card in there. I do think it's convenient. I don't know if it's planned, but you never know. But I don't see Clog doing all that well right now with all like the swarm decks and things that are being played. But who knows? This will probably open the card up to, more stuff in the future. And it has the small bonus of not being able to be Shang-Chi'd at a 4/9, which feels pretty good to me. Onslaught is going from a 6/7 to a 6/8. Did you imagine a 4/8? No, a 6/7 to a 6/8. I don't know. Maybe they feel like this card needs it, but I feel like it's always had a spot in its own decks. I know that this is going to help with, like Iron Man numbers and things. Going from 14 power to 16 power can very quickly scale to, 32 power with, other effects. So, like, this definitely is going to change things. I don't know. I look at Spectrum at a 6/6 and I'm like, how is this fair? How is this fair? But that's just my opinion. Mr. Fantastic is going from a 3/2 that said ongoing adjacent locations have +2 power to 3/1 ongoing adjacent locations have 3 power. And this is cool. I've mentioned before, I think Mr. Fantastic could need a buff, and this is pretty much the best that could have happened to this guy. Yes, he's going to suck in the middle location, but that's not why you're playing the Fantastic. You're playing it so you can spread some power. And this gives a little bit more of a reason to play him in a deck with Miss Marvel. If you play both Mr. Fantastic and Miss Marvel, that's 8 in both other lanes. That is significant. And the commitment is just throwing this down on 3. This also contests things like Jeff. Part of the reason that, I think Mr. Fantastic fell out of favor very quickly is because you have all of these cards that are, at a baseline 3 power that can get into these locations, like Jeff. But, other cards too, like Grapple Arrow, like bringing something over. We have more things now to deal with inaccessible locations. Having +3 power, I feel like, is the minimum you can have to have an impact. And now we got it. And now that Moonstone is a card, if you put this and Moonstone together, that's 6 power in both lanes. That's good. That's awesome. So I'm totally down with this. I hope that it isn't so strong that it doesn't just become like an every deck thing. Because, +3 power in 2 lanes is pretty significant. That's like having an extra Jeff in there. But, it could be the case that this is now just going to be a staple in ongoing decks, which I think is fair. I think that works. The last change here is the big one, and it's to Hela. Poor Hela, man. I don't like playing against Hela. I need to preface it with that. But I do think that I can feel for Hela enjoyers having their card changed so many times. This is a pretty huge change, too. She used to be a 6/7 that said, on reveal, resurrect all cards you discarded to random locations with -3 power. And now, she's a 6/9 that says, on reveal, for each different cost among them, resurrect a card you discarded to a random location. Now, that's a bit wordy and doesn't read super clearly, but basically what this means is she now only resurrects 1 card per card cost. So if you discard 2 6 costs, she'll only resurrect 1. And the same goes for 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So if you were to discard 1 of each cost, including Wasp, I guess, you would get 7 cards on the board. Oh, actually, with Death, you could technically get 8. You could get 8. That would be really difficult, but I think it might be possible. The idea here is, I think, to spice up the deck building. Because Hela was always just a thing where it's like, let's discard the biggest stuff, and then once you discarded the biggest stuff, which is usually all 6 costs, you play her down, and then you just win, because it's absurd numbers. I think this leads itself to, being a little bit more interesting. There are different, ideas you could have for how you want to build this. Like, for example, maybe I just make a Patriot deck, and I just throw MODOK Hela in there, or something. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I just throw Invisible Woman, I have, like, a wave thing. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I swap up a couple of cards, and I'm trying to get a combo going. Or maybe I just get a little bit more variety in the cards that I'm discarding, right? I can do a Death, I can do an InfiNOT, then I can do an Iron Man, then I can do a Crossbones or a Black Cat, right? And then resurrect those. It's not nearly as much power as it used to be, but it's pretty close. And depending on the roles, with like an Iron Man or a Doctor Doom or, some of these cards, I think your spread of power can still be extremely good. And her body itself is a 6/9, which, as you remember, I said is like the bare minimum for like a vanilla sort of 6 cost to be playable. That's what America Chavez used to be, was a 6/9, and that felt okay. Like it's fine. You can swing a lane with that. And I think in this case it's going to help her a lot, because where you place Hela, she's putting up pretty okay numbers too. And she can't be Shang-Chi'd, which is, again, a minor benefit. I know that doesn't make or break a card, but that's pretty nice too, right? Like if you have priority and you resurrect things, they're not going to be able to Shang-Chi your entire lane, right? Really interesting. I'm kind of digging this, actually. I think so far what I've seen are your sort of typical first thoughts with this, right? The death, you throw in like InfiNOT, you throw in Arrow because she's like the biggest base 5 that doesn't have a downside. You then throw in like Ebony Maw, and you have a couple of things in there like Corvus Glaive and those kind of cards, so you can discard a bunch of stuff in the event that you don't get the right cards. And I think that's going to be the standard way to play this list, and I still think that it puts up good numbers. I think that there's an interesting argument again about that like Patriot example. Like imagine instead I get Ultron, I get Patriot, I get like Blue Marvel, and I just try to discard those cards and throw them onto the board. Now, is that the most effective way to play the deck? Probably not. I would have to see how it feels. I don't know. I'm kind of spitballing here. But I think you get my point, right? I think that there's going to be a list that maybe does something a little special with this, where the resurrection gives you a combo that isn't like location specific, and it might be really, really good to do that instead of the normal version of the deck. But, randomness definitely isn't a pro, so you'd mostly be doing it for, I guess, the energy cheating, maybe. Like, maybe you just get some, again, I don't know, maybe like an Annihilus deck, maybe? Like, you just resurrect like Annihilus with, Sentry, and you already have some negative stuff. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. I think there's more creative stuff to be done. But I think that about covers it. Thank you for joining me on this little bit more lengthy episode. We had a lot to talk about. As a reminder, you can follow me on all my socials. I am posting on my YouTube channel as frequently as possible, which right now is like once a week or every 2 weeks. And you can also follow me on Blue Sky. I post there pretty regularly, and you can catch me there. If there's one thing that you can remember, it's that I'm InfiNOT. Thanks for listening.